Thank you for joining us. My name is Romeo. This is another edition of the B3 show. And today we're going to have an amazing show. And we're going to be talking about the state of the city with our Mayor Emma Mulvaney-Stanak. I'm glad that I learned how to say your name right. And we're going to be having in just a multi-segment, and we're going to be talking about our opening segment and the November elections and its impact, which has been just very recent, the state of the city, and bringing Burlington together, and of course our closing segment. So Mayor, first and foremost, thank you for joining me, and thank you for being on the show. I know it's been a busy life, and it's been a busy, is it 6 months so far you've been?
Lost track a little bit, but I think we're at 7, maybe just wrapped up 7 months. Yep.
Okay, so 7 months, and I know you have a lot to do and a lot goes on in the world. So thank you for being here. And we want to begin with just a quick opening statement, if you'd like to say anything on how you're doing, how's your young family doing, and how you're doing despite everything in the world that is going on, and just whatever you want to tell us.
I love that. And I love this conversational setup for this show as well. I think that really helps to really plain language what's happening in the city and just have a conversation about our beloved Queen City. So thanks again for having me, Romeo. I really appreciate it. So it's been a really interesting first 7 months. I knew this job would be intense. I knew it would be quite a professional undertaking. There is a lot going on in the city, regardless of the outcome of the national election, of course, this week. And so we've been really hard at work, and I am so impressed with the nearly 700 or so folks who work for the city of Burlington, their dedication, their loyalty, their innovation in times when we really have had some significant just structural challenges in the city, and that includes our budget and making sure we're right-sizing our budget. When I walked in the first 2 months, we had a $14 million budget gap that we had to navigate as a full team, as a city, and I thought all the departments really linked arms and worked on that massive first challenge well together to really think about how do we do this in the fairest way, in the most efficient way, because we had to present a budget quickly to the council, and I was a brand new mayor just learning the budget while also having to make some pretty significant determinations of how we were going to provide an affordable budget and one that was fair to all taxpayers, and I think we were able to achieve that. And then fast forward, of course, and what we've all been living through in Burlington and elsewhere in the state and country for the last several years is a compounding of several emergencies: our housing emergency, our mental health emergency, substance use. We have quite sort of the trifecta of challenges facing the city. And as the largest city in Burlington, or in Vermont, being Burlington, of course, we have attracted a lot of folks who are in a pretty dark and challenging place in their lives. I grew up in central Vermont, and I said a lot during the campaign, and I still believe it. If I were unsheltered, if I were struggling to meet my basic needs, the last place I would say is a rural town where you don't have public transportation, where you don't have easy access to a grocery store or other services. I would try to locate to where it's a little easier to survive. And while that might be the reality, the impact on Burlington and Burlington's well-being is definitely being felt by all of us. And as the mayor, I've been trying to really focus a humane approach of how to support these Vermonters who are unsheltered, also supporting the Vermonters who are on our streets, obviously having real struggles with mental health, and then folks who are really in the depths of a substance use disorder, which is a medical disorder, and bringing that compassion, while also trying to figure out how do we hold folks accountable in a way that really brings the best forward in the community, both in our response for folks who aren't experiencing those challenges, but also making sure that those folks who are connected to services, are held accountable if they are harming our community, and that we find a path forward. But it's very tricky, and it's been a really wild leadership moment of trying to rise to the occasion, also operating a city. It's been a pretty amazing 7 months.
Thank you so much. And as part of the opening statement, how's your family doing? And I know because
what?
Because I know that's incredibly important. That is part of your just part of being a human being. How are they taken in? And between the 7 month that you've been dealing with all the issues that are, competing for your interest and everything. And I'm guessing that takes toll on you, takes toll on your family, takes toll on your staff. How's everybody doing? And how are you doing in terms of that?
Well, I'm deeply
concept?
Appreciative of my family. I should probably look at the camera and say, thank you, family, for hanging in there with me. So I do have 2 small kids. One's in elementary school, one's still in preschool. And my wife has been such a big champion of me and a supporter. We really try, we both have really big jobs, and we try very much to support each other throughout our marriage around trying big things. We are deeply committed to community service and the well-being of our city. So I've been really appreciative of that. My kids, it's funny, my 5-year-old in particular, I can't quite tell what he thinks about the whole thing. He's just sort of living his best life most of the time, but he thinks it's pretty darn cool, and he likes to come to the office, and he feels very comfortable. He writes all over my whiteboard, and and my daughter also makes herself comfortable in that space. And I think it's really, this is the first time there's been a woman elected mayor of the a mayor in this history of the city. Obviously, then by extension, the first mom, and it's not common where there are elected leaders anywhere up and down the ballot who are elected women with small children in particular. So I held that perspective really seriously in the State House when I served as a legislator. It gives you a very different lived experience and real-time urgency on some core issues, especially around community safety, but also things that support families, and especially working families. And now that I'm in city government and municipal level work, I see very much around how we can view things through the lens of supporting families and making sure that their well-being is top of mind as we think about even basic things of transportation and how you get about around town, thinking around school safety, all the components of that, of course, thinking around also people's ability to meet their basic needs. We're doing a deep dive in our city budget for this next fiscal year to, again, make sure we're continuing to right size. We're going to have another budget gap, unfortunately, that we're facing. So this time around, now that I have more time, I'm really asking department heads to think about things through an equity lens, to equitably look at delivery of our services, to think about affordability of those services, to think about when we're offering scholarships or subsidies, how do we really make sure we're consistent across the board, that we're getting to the right parts of our community, especially families, so they can really benefit from our city services.
Thank you so much. And what I wanted to find out more is, and we're going to move on to this segment, is and kind of tease to the election that we just went through, which based on all the stuff that's going on, there were a couple of key things that were on the ballots. One being about the police commission getting more, I don't know if I would call it power, or at least being able to set up a panel to oversee, key deficiencies of the department, if there's like complaints and stuff like that. Based on how the November election went, what is your thought process on not only just that particular item, but just how you see the election went in the city and the level of response from voters and stuff like that? And if you could kind of touch on that, that'd be great.
Of course. Right. So usually in November, the city doesn't have an election. So we did have a special election. We tagged along to the state and federal election. So there were 2 ballot questions. And I'm happy to comment on the other one too, which was simply a Burlington Electric Department revenue bond. And it was to help us continue to do our work, climate forward work related to net zero, making sure our grid is reliable, making sure we have the capital to be able to do more electric vehicle chargers, those kinds of infrastructure within the city, to make sure that ratepayers don't have to pay that out of pocket, essentially. Bonding is a smarter financial way to do that. So I'm very appreciative that voters approved that over, I forget the number, but it was over 70%, which is a really good affirmation that BED is on the right path, and that we could continue to leverage resources in a smart way that keeps the pressure off of ratepayers, but also make sure we are investing in critical infrastructure to keep moving towards our climate goals and running a good, sustainable, publicly owned electric utility in this case. The second question certainly got way more attention, and that is the police oversight charter change question you were mentioning. There are actually 3 parts of that question, or 3 components that the charter will be changed now to reflect, or at least it will go to the legislature. I'm happy to explain that process, having saw that process up front.
I thought it was vote and done, but it goes to the
legislature.
legislature.
It's a journey on the charter change. Let me start there first, and I'll come back to the details of the actual charter change. So the charter change, the charter for the city city is the most important governing document of our city. It's like the Constitution for our city. And this is why in part why I was so supportive of this particular question, because when we put things in charter, and you'll understand this in a minute once I explain the process, it's hard to change by design, because we need that to be our core document, that regardless of who's mayor or city council, or in this case, regardless of who's the police chief and the policies set within a department or not, which are much easier to change, we have put into our most important document the core principles, the core procedures, the core authority, and that is very hard to change because we want that consistency no matter who's running the city. And so when you pass a charter change, it goes through the various committee steps of the process. It's a good 3 to 4 months of just procedural work on the local level, so the community has the opportunity to engage. It goes through city council committees. It goes to the city council itself. Then it comes to me as the mayor. At all those steps along the way, it can be changed, amended, et cetera, but that's several steps of approval. Then it goes to the voters, and it is a majority rules question, so it has to receive the majority of support from Burlington voters. And then it goes to the state legislature. And that's because we have a kind of a local control but state oversight model in the state of Vermont. And every charter change, whether it's a small thing or a big thing, must go through the full legislative process, which includes votes in the House and Senate and then the governor. Right. And then it will come back. And in some cases, most cases, there's likely an ordinance piece that needs to go after that. So, for example, a good example is Burlington passed a couple years ago now a just cause eviction charter change to allow us to be able to regulate the eviction process for tenants in an apartment, in a rental unit or whatnot. That went through the whole process. It was vetoed by the governor, so it hasn't come back yet. But the reason I'm using that as an example, the charter simply says the city of Burlington will be able to, I forget the language, of course, but to be able to regulate the eviction process, and it has the powers to do so. And then the details of that would have then been done through an ordinance process. So there's lots of steps along the way, which is, again, very important because this is our most important governing document. So back to the charter change for the police oversight, those 3 components were quite important because it also represents a compromise that was worked out between Democratic leaders and progressive leaders over the last 18 months, 2 years or so, after the last attempt at an oversight question was failed in front of voters in 2022, 2023 or so. And that, to me, part of the importance of democracy, and this is so important to talk about since the outcome of Tuesday's federal election, the integrity of our democracy should be about compromise, working together, right, incremental change, and that we don't allow big radical shifts one way or the other. And I really, truly believe this particular charter change is the result of that good work. Democrats and progressives worked alongside each other to figure out, okay, since the voters said no to this, what else can it be? We knew out of 2020 with the George Floyd's murder and the call amongst this community very strongly that we needed to start moving forward in a more intentional and better way around racial justice, and that includes issues of transparency and oversight and community trust in our policing system. And it's been a very rocky road, of course, these last 4 years, but that doesn't mean we don't do anything. We have to figure out what can work and be supported by voters, and that this question really is the result of that. The police chief and the BPOA, the police union, were also involved in the development of this question. And while they ultimately disagreed with the outcome, which is totally fair and their right to, the BPOA in particular.
I will admit I voted no, in part because of,
yep.
I had some concerns, but as I'm learning based on what you're saying and based on what I've read, I'm somewhat questioning my no, but nonetheless, I appreciate for kind of clarifying.
Yeah, and these 3 things are important because now it was passed by 60% of the voters, and we now go to the State House. But one of the things that was clear to me in this first charter change voter education effort, if you will, is how important it is for us to plain language it so voters know what is changing, what's not changing, because you can hear from elected leaders or from any advocacy organization their own interpretation of it. But we were able, I want to do it earlier in the process next time that we have a charter, but about 2 or 3 weeks out on our city website, we put very plain language prepared by our city attorneys in a nonpartisan way of saying this is what changes, so people could determine their own opinion on the question. question. And I think what we need to do more of is more of that earlier on. One of the things the Secretary of State did in this election cycle for the first time was came in with your ballot, a little QR code that you could scan in and go to a website. It was an election guide and a nonpartisan way for all the candidates and any other thing on the ballot for people to go and just learn a bit more. It's sometimes, even and I am a political nerd, let me tell you, about ballots. Yeah, right? Deep in the weeds. But even sometimes I'm like, we'll look at a ballot and say, what is that? I missed that one, And so it's important for people to know.
I did get a pamphlet, though, for election day.
Yep. And I don't know who sent the pamphlet, but
I think it's from the city.
It was from the city?
Some kind of like how to vote and all that stuff.
Oh, how you vote, yeah. That part we wanted to also make sure because it was a special election, right? Which is not usual, again, on that November ballot. But the three basic things, just so folks know what did pass, is the independent panel you mentioned.
Right.
That is actually separate from the police commission on purpose, and it would be rarely used, but it is an important new layer once approved by the legislature, of course, and governor, that would allow when there's a disagreement between the police chief and the police commission on a officer discipline issue, which hopefully is super, super rare, but it allows another entity full of professionals who have a legal background, HR background, labor background, to be able to determine what the ultimate decision will be. And I have very much reflected in these last 7 months around the power that one person can have when you're in an executive position as a mayor or a department head. And I don't think it should be on something so important around the outcome of a discipline issue that rises to that level. It should not sit in the hands of one person. There should be an ability for us to have another layer of oversight. And so that was the one piece. The other two pieces, I think, got sort of lost in the shuffle of the independent panel, but they're just as important. And the second one is that right now in our charter, the language about the mayor's oversight of the police chief is a little murky, unlike the other department heads we have in our city.
But you are the chief executive officer.
I am
right?
per charter, but then it's a little murky around operations of the police department. And to make sure we have a modern city that's consistent, where that charter change also made sure that language is standard alongside all the other department heads we have. And then the final part, just to the police commission, just very briefly, a lot of what their oversight and authority is about is in policy right now, but back to what I said before around this very important charter document, this is now in charter, where they will have the ability to set policy, have auditability, oversight of the police department, and this is arguably one of the most important commissions we have. It is very important to have those rights and responsibilities of the commission in our charter.
What about the Marketplace Commission? Is it good?
Well, that's also in our charter already. I think this is a bigger conversation, and maybe I'll come back another time because if you want to talk about dorkiness, we have a big question around what we do with the structure of our city. I mentioned I came in with a $14 million budget gap, and we're expecting another multi-million-dollar budget gap again because our city has grown so sizably in the last 5 to 6 years.
Do you have any idea what that would look like? Or
the number estimate, we talked about this at the last council meeting, so I can say publicly, it's unfortunately the range is somewhere between 8 to 10, maybe 11 million. And without changing anything.
So less than 14. But was still...
Yes, but slow clap moment because the general fund in general, our operating budget is just over 100 million. So that's a sizable percentage of our budget. So when we think about how are we going to make this an affordable city for folks and not have to continually increase our property taxes or gross receipts for that matter, we have to think about in an intentional and purposeful way changing the size of our government. What are the core services that we need to run as a city? These are the questions that will be coming to community members in the coming months. Now that we have a little bit more of a runway than I did with this last budget, because I want Burlingtonians to tell us, what are the core services? We were able to benefit from a lot of one-time funds, largely, ARPA and other funds from the federal level. There was no continuity of where that revenue would come once that money ended. And so now we're in this critical moment alongside a lot of communities across the country of how do we make those decisions and how do we also give people a transparent understanding of why we're doing this and again, making the tough choices we need to make. And to the marketplace, part of those many questions are, how do we integrate where we can and realize that the city of Burlington is different than it was in 1984? And how do we have more modern departments and do what we can make them have the most impact on and need to fill that need as a city? But what can we let go of? And I'm not saying that's the marketplace necessarily, but one of the questions is what do we do with the marketplace merged within our business workforce and development department? And how does that interface with CEDO? How does that interface with other entities that exist in the business community?
Right. Thank you. And I promise you I'm not infectious or anything.
No,
but
you're totally fine. I have small children. I live in the land of germs all the time. It's fine.
So how was the was there a lot of people voting this time around? I know it was a very special election. Did you get a lot of people voting?
I can't remember
Who
what the
showed up,
turnout
or-
was, but I do think statewide we were, well, people will fact check me if necessary. I think it was upwards near 70% turnout or so, which is significant in general, but it would have been that high anyway, because in a presidential election cycle, that's when you see the highest turnout.
Right.
Some people only vote every 4 years for the presidential election.
Correct,
So
yeah.
I think that's certainly benefited everything down ticket, including our questions for the city. And in many ways, I feel affirmed by that, because it tells us that even more people than would normally maybe vote on a March election were able to weigh in on these two important questions around police oversight and the Burlington Electric Department's bond.
Okay, so just to go back on the election, the number 2 question, one of the reasons why I bring that up is, and I've spoken to the chief, is trust building. And this is something that I've brought up since I moved to this city, and I think it's always been in my mind living in other parts of the world as well. I don't know if you've seen and I don't know if it's appropriate to bring up this in this show per se, but kind of what brings my thought process into the trust building part of thing. There was a video of private citizen filming around, I don't know, maybe you came across or maybe not. And he had, somebody he came across, unhoused community member, saw him filming North End area where there was like camping and stuff like that. And so the person was like, "Hey, why are you filming?" And then he was like, I'm allowed to film. I'm not filming you directly. I'm just filming my experience of the city, whatever." And so the private citizen who's filming was afraid for his life because this guy was chasing through around and threatening him and everything. And so officers responded to the incident at the time. I don't know if you're aware of it or not. So long story short, just the tone, demeanor, and manner in which these two, the lieutenant and the sergeant were just addressing the private citizen who was filming, which is technically within his legal right, because there's no expectation to privacy unless you create one in public. So, but in just the tone, not so much of, hey, you're doing something wrong, but in just to the level of how they were speaking to, the level of dismissiveness, that got me concerned personally. And I'm not against police officers. I'm not against them doing, because it's a very difficult job to do, really. I work at the bus station. I have a lot of pushbacks from members of the community who are doing something wrong, and I'm telling them, hey, don't vape here, don't smoke here, don't shoot here, don't assault here. And so I do get a lot of pushback, and I can't imagine what they go through. It's much more what I go through. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is, as part of the trust building process, how we treat people in public, and I'm sure in your private life, it kind of translates into what kind of character you're at and how the public can start trusting you much better, right? So what I was wondering was just your thought process of I missed your public safety forum, which I feel bad really, because there was a word.
It's recorded by Town Meeting TV,
I'm gonna watch
which I really appreciate.
I'm definitely gonna watch it.
It was a good one, actually.
But,
it talked a lot about youth and violence, which I encourage everyone who was also not able to attend to really check out, because we had King Street Center and also the New American Advisory Council there, talking specifically about some really strong recommendations of how to move forward. So, little commercial.
So the reason why I'm going into that is, I think I included you in the email, I think, but he responded directly to me, which I felt the response was not necessarily adequate. It was more like a sort of like a passive-aggressive, dismissive response. And this is where I always speak to both the chief and, whenever I run into, some of the officers they're incredibly amazing to talk to. And whenever they need help, they come to the bus station, like if they're looking for a video or whatever. So, or when I see them in the public, I just chat with them and whatnot. But my thing is, when you want to build a trust with the public or with an individual, you have to find a way where you're able to communicate clearly and you don't come across condescending, even if you're right or wrong. Just that tone of how somebody's speaking to somebody else. So I wanted to see what, if you ever notice anything unusual or what the city might be doing in terms of helping, rebuild that trust between members of the public and the community. Because a lot of time I'm hearing that they want to do programs, but I'm not seeing anything happen with the department and the community members. Do you know anything about that? Because that, for me, that was a driving force for wanted to vote, though I voted no because I was trying to avoid seeing, creating multiple layers just to find out who's wrong and who's right. Because I feel like when you get more bureaucratic, it kind of, it takes more time to find a resolution and all that kind of stuff. But based on the way you explain, I can appreciate that. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you and just kind of learn your thought of it, because that's how I voted as personally for me, and I'm sure it's different for you as well. Yeah.
So much to unpack there, Romeo, about that one. Well,
Thank
first
you.
of all, there's a lot of ways to build trust in the community. I used to be a community organizer and a labor organizer for most of my career, and some of the most foundational things we can do and need to do better is relationship building. And I mean that in the most basic way, but also in terms of institutions with communities and with neighborhoods. And that is why, as we continue to rebuild the police department and to take some of the pressure off of our police officers who are really being overworked right now, and to build the kind of cultures and recruiting the kind of police officers we really want here in Burlington, that hopefully will get us back to a place someday soon where we can do a community-based policing model in our city. We did it for a very brief moment of time several years ago now. But that would allow officers to have a dedicated portion of the city for which they patrol and can build those relationships, to be out of the cars, walking the beat, if you will. I remember I live in the Old North End. When we were doing it, an officer would walk up and down North Street and meet kids and meet businesses and be able to get familiar with that part of town to just be available. And it de-escalates in some ways, at least, the engagement for some parts of our community, at least. I am not saying that everyone will always feel comfortable around police. I think that is another very important reality that we incorporate in our training of officers, or where we want the police department to go, to be able to really understand bias and implicit bias, and to know that this is part of a call to service, to understand those kind of dynamics, that racism and bias is a thing. There are parts of our community that have not felt treated well, have felt the impacts of policing wherever they might have grown up in this country, right? And this is something being experienced in every community. And we can figure this out, and we have some really amazing officers who are working in our department and professional staff around them. And I have great trust and confidence that we will get there as we build this department back. In terms of folks who experience crimes and experience our police force as well, that's why this process of police oversight is actually quite important, to be transparent and easy to navigate, because people don't always get it right in terms of any profession, right? And it's important. We do have a complaint system. That's why the police commission is such an important one. It starts first internally within our police department, and then it would, if needed, go to the police commission for that layer of accountability. And sometimes, in this, I'm not 100% familiar with all the details of this incident, but I think I know which one you're talking about. There's a lot of murkiness sometimes around victim, who's the victim, who's not the victim. I think everyone was harmed in that scenario for the little bits I know, and I think what we need to know is when police are responding, that they have the training to be able to kind of untangle that, and that we also utilize all aspects of our community safety response system, which now in Burlington includes a community safety liaison, includes other aspects where folks can come and maybe help with some of that relationship navigation that needs to happen, as well as our victim services professionals we have both within the police department and within our community justice center. So it's complicated at times, and folks can always do better. And it's for me, I just want to be really clear. I have great confidence in our police department, and we have work to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and I appreciate that. I know community safety is very important to you, and I know that was part of your, I would say, as the English would say, the mandate that you were running on. And so I appreciate that. And we're going to move on. I know this is a very long subject. I don't want to keep you too long on it.
I talk about community safety all day long. It's fine.
I wanted to find out, in your eyes, over the past 7 months, where do you see the state of the city it is? And just, if you could tell us, please.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I want to also acknowledge that in these last, it's not even been a week yet since the national election was determined. I want to acknowledge that many folks in Burlington, because Burlington, the vast majority of folks in Burlington supported a different candidate than who was ultimately elected for president. And we have lived under his presidency before, and it was a very nerve-wracking and dangerous and a very difficult time for many folks, including folks who live here in Burlington. Burlington is a sanctuary city. It's a city within a state that has really affirmed a values base where we want safe and inclusive communities that recognize the identities and the trueness of everyone's who you truly are, whether you're trans, whether you're non-binary, whether you are BIPOC, whether you are a new American, and even if you're undocumented, to be able to really create a safe community for folks. And so now I would probably have a different answer if we were doing this show a week ago. And I'm happy to still comment sort of on the hyper local of where I think we are in these 7 months. But things are changing, and many people are worried. And I want to make sure that we are able to do what we can as a city to continue to make sure this is a safe and inclusive community where we can have dialogue and conversation, that we can make sure that our youth in particular are protected and the most vulnerable parts of our community are protected. And I want to just really ask folks in the community to be frank, to make sure that we know that at the end of the day, we are neighbors here, and the outcome of this election is not permission to bully, to harass, to villainize, to sort of create more harm in our community based on the outcome of that election. Because I've seen it already, and I'm hearing it reports in other places around bullying in schools upticking, around targeting of folks with marginalized identities, and that has no place here. Right. And we will do everything we can within the city, and I will work with partners to make sure that we have a safe community, because that is not the Burlington way. Separate from that big reality shift that we have right now, the state of the city is slowly, back to what I said before about incremental change, is slowly moving in a direction. I'm proud of the fact that I have I think a very decent working relationship with the city council. That is very important as the executive branch to make sure we have a working relationship. Councilor President Van Travers and I meet weekly and regularly to talk about the state of the city affairs. I want the council to be a partner. I want us to have ability to work towards compromise, because I think that makes better policy at the end of the day. And we have to move with the urgency of what folks are experiencing in the city around really figuring out this community safety complex challenge. If it was easy, it would have been solved before I became mayor. And I really want to emphasize that. The one thing I have also experienced in these first 7 months is the fatigue of a lot of folks in the community, and a hopefulness that I would come in and, I don't know if I thought I had a magic wand, but that I would immediately solve everything immediately. And regardless of the fact that so many of these different factors are much bigger than Burlington, much bigger than one mayor, I think folks are settling and understanding that as we do a better job of trying pilots and trying different strategies to work within the city. If we do nothing, the status quo continues to harm folks, and that is not what we're doing. We've have a hotspot strategy we've been implemented since May, where we weekly address hotspots within the community where increased behaviors, whether they're illegal or just sort of harmful to the community, are happening, with strategic response from cross departments. We are beginning conversations on our retail theft regional response, kind of a mutual aid style piece to bring folks to the table. We're trying to really improve our relationship with the state's attorney's office in ways that make sure we're working seamlessly together to really make ssure folks are held accountable, and that we as a city to make sure the state is providing resources to help with the court backlog and to get enough judges in the Chittenden County court system. So we are doing multiple things. And one, we talked about my community safety forums. I'm holding these forums every 2 months until we have nothing left to talk about.
Good,
and so the next one will be January 9th, 5:30 to 7, most likely at City Hall, but we're working on confirming the location. Because these issues are so complicated, it is deeply unsatisfying to come to one 90-minute forum and expect to get the depth of any particular topic, right? And so we just did one that's recorded. People can see it. It was from this last week on violence, anti-violence strategies, and specifically youth who are finding their ways to violence, and also some troubling patterns around being low-level drug dealers and whatnot, because you can make a lot of money that way. And so we really focus on that issue. January will be all about substance use. What are we doing with open drug use in the city? What are we doing with people who are struggling with substance use disorder? How are we working on a regional and state level around interrupting the supply in the city and in Vermont in general? And I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest in that one, which is why we're trying to find a larger space for that one.
Thank you. Working at the bus station really gives me a kind of a view of what's going on in the city in terms of how our residents are doing. What are some from what I noticed that it's interesting. I don't know if you noticed, and I hope you come to the bus station someday.
Oh yeah, no, I walk by a lot, so I should.
Oh, you do? Okay, cool. Yeah, come say hello. Come say hello, please. I feel like a lot of the ills get solved at the bus station. I don't know. It's really interesting to watch. And I also noticed that there's a lot of new individuals that I've never seen before. Every 3 to 2 weeks that show up, and I'm not saying everybody's up to nefarious activity or whatever, but it's a very dynamic way of them showing up and trying to kind of meet up a couple people. I've seen drug being exchanged near the bus station by the state building, where now I think it's empty as well.
Right.
So it's really, it opened my eyes into what people are going through in terms of like finding a place, getting help, who's going through trouble, who's not having a place to stay, and so on and so forth. So what I was wondering was, and I know you're working through when it comes to housing folks and so on and so forth, and I'm noticing that there's a lot of people who are still going through the system, who don't have a place to stay, who are still being re-abused. They go to like Maine. At least I can confidently say I've spoken to 10 individuals who've gone either to Maine or New Hampshire to get some treatment. But the moment they come back within, I'd say about under a week, they end up meeting the same folks that probably put them in that situation, and then they go back at it. And then another observation that I've made is at the library, there's a parking right behind it with the abandoned building. A lot is going on there, and I do remember raising that to Chocolate Thunder, I think, who's their security, I think part-time or something. So I'm wondering if you're noticing anything like that when it comes to
absolutely.
public health.
This is what the hotspot stuff is really about. And while the bus depot area hasn't necessarily been formally, there's not really a formal, we do look at data just to see where the uptick of calls and activity is happening to kind of concentrate efforts. And when school was reopening for the year, we were trying to really focus on that corridor between BHS downtown and the BTC site, which is in the bottom of that Cherry Street building, just around safety for students and staff going back and forth. And for when school opens and closes, we've done some intentional kind of police presence or community safety officer presence that has definitely helped. But you're totally right. What you were describing, though, is kind of why this is so complicated. When people cannot meet their basic needs, if you cannot find stable and affordable housing, and you are struggling with any number of other coexisting challenges, untreated mental health, substance use of any magnitude or of any substance, it becomes that much more challenging. And then if you find your way to treatment, well, I'm really glad people are still trying to access treatment, but most of the treatment available, at least in state, is pretty prohibitive in terms of cost if you need something more than 2 weeks, and there's not enough beds. And that is, again, why it's such a good example of why Burlington really needs a strong partnership with the state to really find better solutions, to be able to rise to the occasion of what we are experiencing in this state, and to get real, frankly, on funding priorities and all the other prohibitions and barriers that keep the treatment that is available to a 2-week pattern. That's not enough time to get off a lot of this highly addictive substances that are in the drug supply in Vermont right now. And then if people are able to find treatment, it's sort of a chain of effects, right? Once they come out of treatment, they need to be able to start their recovery in stable housing with wraparound services to be set up for success. And we don't have enough transitional housing available. We need housing of every single sort and kind. And we also need emergency housing of every single sort and kind. Right. Because so many folks are unsheltered right now, and even more became unsheltered in September when the state changed its program. And that's why you're probably seeing more people come, because there are literally more unsheltered people in Burlington right now. We've seen an increase of a good 100 to 200 more people in Burlington who have, even if they wanted to find a shelter bed, there is no shelter bed available. Well, we've been working with COTS to try to open one on Pearl Street, but that one's a little bit delayed because the federal process is slow. But hopefully I'm hoping by early January we'll have that open.
There's a state building right next to us. It's empty. I know they used last winter, and I think by the time they were done, I think it was just open about a week. By the time they were done, they went from 15 people showing up to 47 people showing up at the end of it. So I'm wondering, it's empty. Why don't they just let you guys use it?
So I asked that very early on. Even when I was mayor-elect, I was working alongside former Mayor Murrow Weinberger because they did set it up for a week, and it was highly costly. It was not, the communication wasn't great. And I said, so as I come in and as Mayor Weinberger goes out, we have to improve our communication communication as a city and state around what can you bring online as a state for emergency shelter. While our communication's gotten a bit better, they said that building was not available because it was under a sales and purchase agreement for a period of time. It has still sat though, so I again always want the state to know that they can reach out to my office, because we need to get creative super fast as the weather turns. And right now, as we've all seen, there are 3 shelters the state has, I feel pre-last minute, but still have slowly opened for families, and families only, not for folks who have any other kind of criteria. And one is in Williston, one is in Waterbury. I actually forget where the third one is, maybe in Montpelier. But it's for maybe about a dozen families, and that's not nearly enough to meet the need we have. And it certainly isn't going to help where we know the most number of people are who are, or the conditions of most people who are unsheltered are folks who need low barrier sheltering because they are living with substance use. And one step to get them to a more stable place is to be able to at least get a roof over their head. And we are just not there, and we are failing as a city and a state right now in this area.
Okay. Yep. Thank you, Mayor. So we have under 5 minutes, and just real quick, if you don't mind, bringing Burlington together. Anything that you have in mind to bring the city together?
Yeah. Well, as a former community organizer and labor organizer, as I said, relationships are so critical. And one expression of how I've been trying to do this out of the gate is holding my mayor meetups every week. So there can be a community dialogue in every district, and it's at varying times. You can find information on my website about where they are. They almost always happen unless it falls on a holiday those days, and people are welcome to come to any one of them, regardless of whether where you live in the city, or if you don't live in the city but work here. I want to hear people's thoughts. I'm using those as community building places so people get to know each other too, and it's not just come either talk at the mayor or be mad at the mayor or whatever, but like build community, and how do we collectively solve solutions?
It's okay to be mad at the mayor, right?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
And then also these community forums are a more creative way to build community, other than, because I see you often at council meetings. That's a very one-way way of communicating, and is not a place to build relationships. Where people get 2 minutes, your time. The council by design is not going to respond. It's very formal, and that works for some people, but it's deeply.
I'll be honest with you, I don't like the 2 minutes public forum thing. It's just it does
got
not
to be
serve
unsatisfying, right?
I don't know whose idea that is, but I get it for the most part when there's like way too many people there. But 99.9%, it's about under 5 people show up.
Yeah.
And so if they can adjust the resolution where it's like flexibility, because they do that, the police commission actually.
Sure. Yep.
So they give you more airtime in case there's like 2-3 people speaking.
Sure.
So
well,
I don't know. But
for folks, and I know you watch a lot of, or are at a lot of council meetings, the other challenge though is the rest of the agenda, to make sure there's deliberative time for the rest of the agenda, because those council rules, governed by the council's rules.
Believe me, I have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, they stop at 10:30. Anyway, I'm not on the council. Those are their rules. But just to bring it back to community, the other way is we're really trying to amplify, and we're doing this in these community safety forums and other ways, is to show and help people find ways to engage in community, to volunteer, to build community in a hyper-local way in their communities. Whenever that forum was this last week, King Street mentioned how critically important it is right now for them to have more mentors, especially male-identified mentors. And that is a very easy way to engage with a lot of the young people they're trying to serve at King Street Center. Former City Councilor Ali Zhang shared how young women, young girls who are in high school are not engaging in the athletic program as much because transportation is a real challenge. So he put a call out of being a volunteer to help transport kids to soccer games and whatever else. There are very tangible ways for us to start leaning in more into our community that can help not only youth, but in all ways, shapes, and sizes. And so we're trying to make sure that is a more easy to find set of opportunities. We're going to figure out how to put that into our website, so when you come to the Burlington website, you can look for jobs with the city, but you can also see volunteer opportunities. That's another really empowering way to not feel like you're in isolation and not feel like you are living in a place of fear or just the unknown, but to be invited back into our community to help build sort of that muscle back.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, Mayor. And as a final, I appreciate for being on the show.
Of course.
And I want to ask you this important question. Do we get to see someday Mayor Stanak? I mean, not Mayor Stanak, but President Stanak someday?
President Mulvaney-Stanak.
President Mulvaney-Stanak,
Right.
yes.
Well,
someday.
you know, I have to say I have a lot. There's a lot I'm going to solve here in Burlington first.
Okay.
So we'll see what comes next. But
Okay.
you know, the state of Vermont has always been my real heart, and state and local politics is always really where I choose to do my policy work. It's a very different rodeo on the federal level, and so if anything, I think you might see me more on the state level again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about during the election, and I said to myself, really, if there's one person that I know may win, I think might be our mayor already.
Right?
So
Well,
I
I
just
think
thought
it's-
about that really. It came
But
to
only
me.
if you know my leadership is one where at the end of the day, and we'll see where we are in 3 years, where the community does feel stronger, more integrated, safer. Those are the metrics for me. And our youth, especially our youth doing better. Have we been able to kind of make that incremental change that we know we're starting to build that momentum again of forward progress, where people feel that vibrancy and diversity of Burlington, and you can feel it everywhere. You can see it everywhere. That to me will be the major measure of success.
Thank you, Mayor. And I know the road ahead is not easy for you, and you know things should never be easy. You got to work through, right, in life. But I'm grateful for your leadership, and regardless, it doesn't matter what political party one ascribes to. At the end of the day, what matters is that you are serving the public, and that you are committed to the city, and you're committed to the state and the country and the world, for that matter. So I thank you for joining me, and thank you for tuning in. And it was amazing time having our mayor here, and join us next time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.